welcome back. Today's book is The House at Riverton by Kate Morton. I have discovered that she is a palate cleanser for me. She, like Rowling, I know I can pick up those novels and enjoy them and just experience all these complexities and wonderful world building and characterization while also enjoying a really good story, a story that makes sense. The House at Riverton, I haven't read it in a number of years. It is her first novel, but I do remember thinking there's something that I didn't love about it, but it's been a number of years. I couldn't remember why. And so that's why I saved it towards the end of her body of work, was because not that I disliked it. My very least favorite book is The Distant Hours. Homecoming, only because I feel like it was wasted talent. She did not do her best work in Homecoming. But in terms of story, I would actually say, or maybe it's even dissatisfaction. We'll find out when I finally reread it. I just remember wanting to throw the book at the wall was The Distant Hours. But The House at Riverton, for me, the miss was the lack of the romance, because she always has some sort of a romance and it's always a tragic ending. So you're rooting for these people and they can never get together, and it breaks your heart because they have such a beautiful love story. While I didn't mind the slow burn, a lot of reviewers are like, it's too slow for me, it takes too long to pick up. And I didn't mind it so much because it's so well written. Great characterization, great world building. You really feel like you are in history. The romance doesn't even begin until maybe 3/4 of the way through the novel, maybe a little bit sooner. The love interest is introduced relatively quickly, but then he is an afterthought until later in the novel. By that point, I started to wonder what was the point of the novel, because it's narrated by a housemaid at the House of Riverton, but she's not really the main character. The main character is a girl named Hannah. I loved Hannah. I thought she was amazing. I loved her and her sister Emmeline and her brother David, and I loved kind of the mystique behind them. But eventually, because she's an independent spirit in a time where women are born and bred to be wives and mothers and to submit, but she's got an adventurer's spirit, and all she wants is to be out in the world experiencing things, doing things. But she comes from a wealthy family, and that's not what is in the cards for her. And then she's finally convinced to marry this guy, at which point she begins to lose anything that captivated me, which, okay, I get it. Absolutely. We lose ourselves when we are in bad marriages, when we are unhappy. But what am I supposed to root for now? Because even then, her love affair doesn't pick up for another couple of chapters. That's when I started to detach, especially because the narrator, Grace, it's Morton is always so complex. So in the grand scheme of things, servants were meant to be seen and not heard. I'm not surprised that everything Grace has to convey to us is detached. And I love that, because the whole book starts because a filmmaker wants to make a movie because this famous poet, R.S. Hunter, had committed suicide at Riverton, and that was kind of like the downfall of Riverton. And she was the last living member of staff, the last living member of anybody who had ever been at the House of Riverton. So she's come and she's visited, and then she meets with the actress who's going to portray her, and the actress is trying to pick her brain about what she thought and how she felt about Hannah and Emmeline. And she's just like, I didn't have thoughts. Like, that was not the role of a servant. These people were not my family. They were my employers. And so I think it's really interesting, that dichotomy of she's so close to everything. She's bringing us this entire book. But at the same time, I'm like, who is Grace? And that was my other issue, was that if I'm not rooting for Hannah, why can't I root for Grace? Because Grace also has a romance. And there is a build with that, and there is this tension, and it is something for us to get excited about, only for Alfred to go off to World War One, and he returns changed. He has PTSD, shell shock, and so now they have to navigate this relationship that's not a relationship, but also the change in his attitude and behavior and personality. And it ended very, well, there's two endings for them. The first one, the more immediate one, I found very unsatisfying, and especially in the events that led up to it. I was like, why are we even in this relationship? This thing with Grace, it also bothered me because if it wasn't Grace's story, why didn't we get more of Hannah? When Hannah stopped being somebody I cared about, I wanted, Emmeline or Emmeline. I wanted Grace. I wanted somebody else that was going to continue to carry me through this novel on their back. And I didn't get that. Those are kind of my two biggest issues. I have some other things. If you can hear it, there is a train behind me. You can hear the guy upstairs. I'm so sorry. It's like he's mad at life when he's walking around up there. And I haven't had the time or the energy to go up there and say, hey, can you just keep it down a little bit? And on that vein, this book was not about Grace. Why did we get so much of Grace? And then what we did get, it kind of trailed off here and there. The main sticking point about Grace is that her mom's a single mother. Her mother had also worked at Riverton. This is how she ended up getting the job. At some point, her mother had left, became like a seamstress of sorts, and now she is struggling because she's got arthritis. So she has this tenuous relationship with her mother. And we do get background and kind of get the answer to that by the end, but I wanted more of that dynamic. Like, why are we encountering her mother? Why are we having comments made about her mother in a way that sparks interest if we're actually not going to figure out her mother? We find things that made her the way she was in certain respects, but I did want more of their relationship. It seems like her mom doesn't even actually like her, because they had this whole, not running joke, but this thing, Grace's entire life, about how her mother should have left her at the orphanage. So I'm like, does your mother love you or not? And then we get all this stuff with Alfred, and then we get, like, she's actually more interesting when she's older, because she can reflect on what she ended up achieving. But in the interim, because we start with her being 14 and we end about 10 years later, who is she in the meantime? Like, we spend so much time with her, but it's almost that same servant mentality. I will walk you through my steps, but it's not actually about me, even though everything you're seeing is through my lens, ergo, everything you're seeing is from my day-to-day life. So, I don't know. Yeah, we'll just leave it there. We pick up with Grace being sent this letter from Ursula, this filmmaker. Ursula is super interested in the suicide of famous poet R.S. Hunter, because her grandma, Florence, has a distant connection to the family. She's grown up her entire life hearing about Riverton and the people who lived at Riverton. So eventually she said, I want to explore this tragic event that happened at Riverton. She writes to Grace. Grace ignores the letter. We're getting all of this information about her grandson, Marcus. So Grace has a very tenuous relationship with her daughter, Ruth. So I guess it's a familial trait. They're just passing it down. At some point in Marcus's life and upbringing had been very close with him. And he is a famous author, but he is currently MIA. Something happened. He was married, they were separated, they were divorced, the wife dies, and now he is a wanderer. He can't handle himself. She's a little bit more focused on Marcus, not like, oh, where is he? I miss him, I'm worried about him, but like, Everybody asks me about Marcus, and I have no clue where Marcus is because I don't even talk to him. But yeah, so this letter shows up and she does nothing about it. But then it comes up again because she thinks it's a letter, I think from Marcus, opens it, and she's like, well, why not? So she meets with Ursula, they keep rolling from there, and we get flashbacks from her. There was this huge cast of characters that I found myself dizzy by, and they're not necessarily important, but I want to do the rundown anyways, just in case that I have to bring them up, because there are interesting aspects. There's Grace, her love interest Alfred, who also is part of the staff at Riverton, Ruth, her daughter, and then Marcus. She did get married after the war because she met this soldier. They got pregnant. They ended up getting married. A bad decision. He goes off to war for World War II, and then when he comes back, it's like, let's not be together. Hannah, Emmeline, and David, and they're the Hartfords. David, wished I had more of him. I found all three very intriguing, but that is not unusual. Morton does a great job in making you love her characters and get invested in them. But it soon became apparent that David was kind of a non-entity. I think we spent so much time with Grace that we missed out on the potential of the three siblings. But David goes off to World War I, and Robbie, or R.S. Hunter, Robbie may or may not be his best friend, but Robbie has a questionable parentage. So when we first meet him, when David first brings him to the house, it's not a warm welcome, let's say. Hannah could do without him because she's like, what are you doing here? I just want to hang out with my brother. Emmeline loves him. She's absolutely infatuated. But David and Robbie, they go off to war. David ends up dying. There is this thing about their dad, how David would write, and the dad seemingly would never read the letters, but then at some point Grace does stumble upon him alone at night reading these letters and weeping. So again, really complex characters and relationships. This is when I do wish that we had perhaps gotten a second narrator, or maybe even a third. Old Grace, young Grace, Hannah or Emmeline, or somebody that could keep that side. I think that would have picked things up and just helped invest us into this family a little bit more. But their grandparents are Lady Violet and Lord Ashbury. They are the ones who own Riverton. They have two sons, Major Jonathan and Frederick, who is David, Hannah, and Emmeline's father. Major Jonathan is the shining star. He is a war hero from the Boer War. He is married to a woman named Jemima. Jemima has previously had two children, two sons, who both died at an early age because they have a blood clotting disease. She does get pregnant again while Jonathan is off fighting in World War I. He passes on, but all she wants is for this child to be a girl because she says that this disease passes over girls. She gets her wish. Those two end up moving to America. Back to Frederick, it's not like he's terrible, but he doesn't have much business sense, and this slight spoiler does lead to them losing their fortune, because then Lord Ashbury dies basically of a broken heart. After he finds out about Lord Jonathan, he has a heart attack or a stroke or something. So both of them die closely together. Frederick, he tries really hard. He has a lot of ideas, but because he does not have business sense, nothing takes off. In a way, he's the black sheep. And then this is when things come into play after Lord Ashbury and Major Jonathan die, because if that new child is not a boy, everything is going to go to Frederick, and nobody's looking forward to that. Poor guy. He does inherit the property over time. This is how Hannah then gets involved with Teddy, who is the man that she ends up getting married. He's an American whose father is a wealthy American businessman. Frederick is trying to get him to bankroll his factory. The guy ends up not doing it, but Hannah, against her father's wishes, does marry Teddy, but neither here nor there. He is a widower. His wife had died many years before. He didn't seem to care about her or their marriage. He had no interest for some reason. We find out later why. He's just kind of living his bachelor life, doing his own thing, trying to make his motor cars and paying for gold and all this other stuff. There is another character named Franny, who is the ward of a lady named Lady Clementine. Don't think Clementine is related to the Ashburys or the Hartfords in any sort of way, but Franny's parents die on the Titanic, and so now she's coming around with Lady Clementine, who's Lady Violet's friend, and she has her eyes set on Frederick, but to no avail. It does not work. She marries some other guy, and then she is the instrument that is used to convince Hannah to get married. From there, we have other household staff, Nancy and Katie, Mr. Hamilton, who is the butler, and then Mrs. Townsend, who is the cook. Nancy and Katie are just other maids, and they are kind of information bearers for us and for Grace throughout this novel. We have Teddy, his sister Deborah, who so unlikable, and again, I would have liked to have dived deeper into her because she's constantly gaslighting Hannah. It's like the two families help each other out. Teddy's family helps Hannah's financially. Hannah's family and their old money, old wealth, old status give Teddy's family status. To me, it's very obvious that Deborah is threatened by Hannah in many ways. One is Hannah is apparently very beautiful. She probably has that class that Deborah wants but can't achieve, even though Deborah is more of a new age woman in the 20s, and we get so many comments about her appearance and her clothes that you can tell that she's very concerned with appearance. So it's not like she's trying to be like Hannah, but I think there is this understanding that Hannah will have something that she never will have. I don't know if some of her motivation comes from actually wanting to save face for the family name, or if she just does not want Hannah to be happy. She kind of talks out of both sides of her mouth sometimes in order to prevent Hannah from pursuing her dreams. But did not like Deborah, wished we'd gotten a little bit more on that. Because sometimes I felt like Teddy and Deborah were in love. Like there was a little incestuous stuff going on there. I don't think there actually was, but it was a little too close for comfort for me. We enter Riverton. Grace is coming for her interview. We learn a little bit about her mom in the sense that she's not in the best of health, and this household staff thinks very highly of her. And since they think highly of her, there is this expectation of Grace. But then Mrs. Townsend sends her back home with some food, and there's a comment made about the circumstances regarding why she left. And so here's just a little breadcrumb. And I do enjoy that these breadcrumbs are dropped. And here's the spoiler. Grace is Frederick's daughter. So Frederick and Grace's mother had an affair when she was part of the staff. Obviously, she got pregnant and she had to leave service. So that means that Grace is the half-sibling of the other three. Everybody seems to know about it. We get all these little hints about this torrid affair. Not like a love affair, but this affair that had occurred. Something had happened that people shouldn't have been involved with. It would have been best if there were no events at all. We get the impression, so Grace figures this out after her mother dies. But over the course of the novel, you're like, does Hannah know? Does Hannah not know? I don't think David or Emmeline ever figure it out, because Hannah is sort of Grace's focus, and they're very close in age. I would have liked, because Grace does have this, considering the relationship she and her mistress, who she eventually becomes a lady's maid to Hannah after Hannah gets married. They have this really close relationship, considering what sort of relationship lady's maid and the mistress should have. I kept wanting something to come of it, to dive deeper into the affair between Frederick and Grace's mom. The end result is what embittered the mother, because now she's a single mother, she can't get a job, she doesn't necessarily want this kid, although why she still kept Grace beyond me, except that we meet Grace for this novel. But it seemed to me that Frederick, like Grace's mother, was his one true love. Just like with Hannah, he had to marry just because he needed to marry. But the person he really wanted was Grace's mom. So I would have liked to have gotten into that, because we do get flashes of how beautiful her mother had been and how, I guess, vivacious and endearing her mother had been. So I would have liked to have seen a little bit of that love story. Give me background into how it developed, and then why it had to end the way it did, or how it actually ended. Like, what were the circumstances regarding, like, how did people know? But we don't get that. Anyways, Grace gets the job, she moves to the big house, and she starts her life via various instances in which she's performing her duties. We get to see the kids. We get to see how they have this game that they call the game, that they have been playing for a very long time, and I actually had to go back and research what this game entailed, because it's never quite spelled out, but it's make-believe. It starts when Emmeline is really young, so if she's 10 or so when the novel begins, it began when she couldn't even write her own name. So they've been playing a long time, and by this point, it's kind of, they're phasing it out. You know, they're growing up, they're not doing it anymore. So I was like, why are we making such a big deal about the game? And then in the end, there's a point when David and Robbie are leaving that she grabs a piece from the game. And then at the very end, Emmeline realizes that she's still, because they have these little books, like it's all about make-believe. And so they go on all these adventures, and then they write them down in these teeny tiny little books that they make themselves. And at some point, I guess, maybe when David had died, Hannah said that she had destroyed everything, but she lied. So then this makes Emmeline mad when later in the novel she realizes that some of the books still exist. But this game seemed to be so important, but it's not actually important. And it's really, they each label themselves as a historical figure, and then they play make-believe in historical events, and then they write about their adventures. So it's like an immersive game, but it's really just make-believe. It's pure imagination, which I found incredibly fascinating. I like this trait. I like this about these characters, and I really would have enjoyed seeing how that played into the rest of their lives, except for the fact that Hannah continues to have an adventurous spirit. Anyways, about Hannah, there's a play that they put on. It's like, what is it? Like a variety show or something that the family will put on. And these three have decided to put on a play about Moses. Hannah comes out at the end dressed in full male garb, which is scandalous. But I'm like, I love it again because she's showing so much personality. And Frederick is kind of fostering it. He doesn't tell them no, and he doesn't tell her, oh, you need to behave more like a lady. He just is like, if this is what you want to do, like, why not do it? We're going through all of that. We learn about how one of their ancestors lost a child. We don't really know why, but this ancestor blamed it on, they have a library with 500 odd books, and this ancestor blamed it on the dust in the books. So now there is a tradition that every year the servants have to dust every single book in the library. Grace is put in charge of it. She's eavesdropping on the kids. It's around Christmas time. Robbie is there. This is when Robbie is introduced, and this is when I wish something had started to blossom between Robbie and Hannah, because I knew that they ended up having an affair later in the novel. My brain went into overtime and was like, oh my gosh, there are hidden feelings here. But in all honesty, Hannah could have cared less for Robbie. Like, she really did not like him. He felt like an intruder in her family. They're trimming the tree, and Emmeline wants to put the angel up top. She ends up falling and getting hurt, and Robbie ends up being able to patch her up anyways. We continue to see bits and pieces into their lives. Meanwhile, present Grace, who is 98 years old, has decided, I'm gonna record, because she has a secret. She has a secret about the family. She has a secret about this house and all of the events that she witnessed with R.S. Hunter's death. She's gonna record her story for Marcus, and then she is going to disclose her secret at the very end. She goes back to Riverton, she goes to the movie set, all these things that continue to throw her back in time, which I gotta say, I quite enjoyed, and this is towards the end, when she goes to Riverton, and all of a sudden she sees Mr. Hamilton on the steps. She knows that he's a ghost, she knows that he's been dead for about 60 years, but for me, I love that she's entertaining this because it is showing her mental instability and how she's declining. I would have liked more. First mention is, oh, you're gonna hate what they did to my pantry. And I love that she's having a conversation with somebody that she knows is dead. It's that fancifulness that Morton puts in there that we missed in this novel. It was a little too much of whatever's going on with Grace and very little to do with the things that Morton generally does to make her novels ethereal and whimsical. We have moved through World War I. We've moved through Alfred coming back with PTSD. And the thing about Alfred, I don't remember what was wrong with him, but he didn't have to go fight, but Grace had been in the village and she had seen somebody make some kind of passive aggressive comment about him being a coward. So that day he comes back and he lets them all know that he has enlisted. He goes off and then he comes back. David goes off and dies. Lord Jonathan dies, and then Lord Ashbury dies. And so now it's kind of like the decline of the Edwardian area. It's the decline of the Hartford / Ashburys and Riverton. And this is also when Jemima has her baby. So all Lady Violet wants is for Hannah to get married before she goes, because she has got to make sure that her family is set up for success. I do believe she comes back, but she's like, this is my goal. What she does is she enlists Franny's help. Franny and Emmeline are practicing for some kind of event that's going to be happening, and Franny just starts talking to Emmeline about how getting married was the best thing she ever did because it actually gave her more independence, and being married enabled her to go see places with her husband. This pulls at Hannah's heartstrings. She starts entertaining the idea of being with Teddy, because Teddy does make mention of places. Like, at this point, he's not a businessman. He's kind of a layabout. He's just living off of daddy's money, going to places, seeing places, doing whatever he wants to do. So this appeals to her. Even though his dad says, oh no, we're not going to bankroll your dad's business, and then this requires her dad to have to sell his factory, which is his pride and joy, and devastates him, which is why he feels betrayed, and he's like, if you marry this guy, I'm never going to speak to you again, and she took that chance. They go to Paris for their honeymoon. We have not met Deborah yet, but we have heard all about Deborah. Hannah, because Grace is along with her, Hannah goes into this part of Paris where she encounters kind of a street artist. This street artist has drawn nude pictures of women who are just kind of hanging around, and she becomes enthralled with one, and she's like, I want that photo, or more like, I want that picture, because a photo is with a camera. He's like, I can't give it to you because it's not mine to give you, but you can ask the woman whose portrait I painted. And so that woman, who is still half naked and hanging out with her stuff hanging out, she's like, well, you can have it, but only in kind. So now Grace is watching Hannah flabbergasted, and she's praying that Hannah does not go through with it, and that Hannah is not going to ruin her name and reputation by being drawn nude. They end up not being able to do it because Hannah doesn't want her husband involved with it. The honeymoon's not that great. They come back and he really has no interest in her. I don't know what this is supposed to insinuate. I don't know if he's supposed to be into men or if he's asexual or like maybe it's just her. No clue. But she's feeling all kinds of pressure about having a kiddo. Although before this, she comes home and Grace gets there first. She shows up at the house and their servants are like, who are you? She's like, I am with the new wife. I was sent here to get here before her and set things up. And they're like, oh yeah, we remember somebody was supposed to come. So they're portrayed, and they're also English. And they're portrayed as real snotty and hoity-toity. Not necessarily because they are better than her, but because they're those kinds of people, which bothered me because I needed to know why they felt they needed to treat her this way. And it's also them who muck things up between Hannah and Robbie, but we'll go into that later. But so we get all kinds of commentary from here till a certain point about how terrible the other servants are. At some point, she's already a lady's maid, so I don't actually know how much interaction she has with them. But Mr. Hamilton and Mrs. Townsend were not happy that she was leaving, and they thought she was making a huge mistake. And I'm like, look, what did you expect her to do? She is getting a little disillusioned with this life because she is thinking, what if I marry Alfred? But for me, because of his shell shock, like they've been writing letters for ages, and he has made not overtures necessarily, but he has done things that make her think he is interested in her. She at this point is very interested in him, but at no point did they actually establish their feelings. All we know is that he sometimes comes to visit her. One time, so Mr. Frederick had a secretary, and for some reason, no one liked the secretary, I guess because she walked around acting like she was big business when she was not big business. But she was very educated. And there was one instance in which Hannah runs into Grace and they both have something to hide. And I'm not quite sold on this whole little subplot, like, because it didn't really have much to do with anything, but it does set up something towards the end, so I guess that's the whole point. But Grace is something of a reader. They're not allowed to have anything besides the Bible at this house. So she sneaks off and she buys a book by a well-known author. When she comes back, she runs into Hannah, who looks like she is up to something. Hannah believes that Grace is up to the same thing, which is learning shorthand, because Hannah wants to help with the war effort. This woman, I can't remember her name, she also knows shorthand. This comes into play later, but first, Alfred, he comes to visit her and he's like, oh, I ran into so-and-so. Did you know she was in the area? And Grace was like, I completely forgot about her. But then she is given a note by Hannah and she's like, I cannot read this. So she does go to this woman. So then the affair kicks up between Robbie and Hannah. I forget why he stops by, but they reconnect. And it's obvious they have a lot of chemistry. And this is when we're sort of getting Hannah's perspective and narration, but not really. She's seen that she never really gave him a chance, and that he has achieved so much with his life that aligns with her interests. And he is now a duke, I believe, because his father, his illegitimate father, or he's really the illegitimate son, but his father has passed and for some reason left everything, including the title, to Robbie. Hannah is married, so this is not going to work. Deborah has a thing for Robbie. He shuts her down. So what she does is she goes to Teddy and she's like, I just don't think it's a good idea for these two to be hanging out all the time. So what they do is they use Emmeline as a beard. Teddy begins hanging out with Emmeline and giving Emmeline this impression that he's into her when really he's just this only way that he can come up with to continue to see Hannah. Eventually, they do take their relationship to a more intimate level. This is around the time that Hannah leaves this note for, or gives this note to Grace. I don't remember what was in the note, but Grace can't read it. So she goes to this other girl and she's like, hey, can you tell me what's in this note? She is supposed to meet up with Alfred, but then Hannah has an emergency regarding Robbie. I think it's Robbie. Whatever it is. Hannah has something that she absolutely positively has to have Grace help her with. Grace ends up being late getting home, or not even that late, but not as early as she probably should have been in order to make sure that wires were not crossed. She gets home only to be told by the other staff, oh, well, yeah, this guy came to see you, but we told him that you had more important things to do, so he left. She races over to the theater where they're supposed to go see a show, only she can't find him. Actually, she got the letter deciphered after this, because she goes to this woman, and this is where she learns that this woman went to the show with Alfred. At this point, Grace vows never to see this woman again. I'm like, but Grace, what kind of a relationship do you have? And so I'm getting really frustrated, really angry. This is one of those miscommunication things, but I don't even know why it's a big deal, because they've not committed to each other. It could be more of a generational thing where whatever their actions have been are enough to say, yes, we are established in a relationship. But for me, I was like, are you or aren't you? Because to me, it feels like he's leading her on because he's so emotionally unstable. He doesn't know how to commit. They have it out. She brings it up to him and he proposes to her. But her brain is on something regarding Hannah, because I think this is when she learned that Hannah was her sister. So she's not actually paying attention to him. And then when she finally does realize that he proposed, which I'm like, Grace, you are so rude. She does not have much personality, but she is like, absolutely, I will absolutely marry you. And then he makes a comment about her leaving service, and she's like, I can't, absolutely not. So she breaks it off and never talks to him again. And he goes and he marries the secretary. And I was just like, you're already questioning whether or not this life is the life for you, because it means you can't have a family. You've fallen in love with Alfred. You turn him away to be with Hannah. Around this point, Frederick has died. The implication is that he committed suicide because Grace's mother has died. It was enough for him to say, I'm done, which again, that would have been a really great side road to venture down this relationship that is talked about this entire novel, but not actually talked about. And I think Lady Violet dies, so there's no way Emmeline can stay at Riverton. She comes to live with Hannah. And earlier, she had already visited Hannah, and they were in financial decline, and you could see that she was kind of bitter and jealous of the fact that Hannah has all this money, this nice house, all these great dresses, this sparkly life. Hannah is like, take all my stuff, I really don't care. But this doesn't seem to be enough for Emmeline. When she comes to live with Hannah, it's like she wants all the privilege that Hannah can afford her without the appreciation that is deserved for the privilege. And that was frustrating for me. And then it was also frustrating. This is Morton's attempt to show generational division. Like, what happens, because there's 5 or 6 year age gap between them. So just how much things can change. The expectations that were had for Hannah are vastly different for Emmeline, now that Emmeline is 18, 19, 20. Emmeline wants to be this big actress, so she goes and shacks up with this French movie maker who is married. Hannah is like, this cannot happen. We have a name to protect. So she goes and she visits Emmeline, or she finds Emmeline at this guy's house where he does all this filming, and she discovers her practically naked in this very risque lingerie, revealing things that shouldn't be revealed. Of course, Emmeline's all upset, as any teenager would be. But I'm like, where did the division happen with Emmeline? This is when I needed more about Emmeline and where she's coming from. How much of this was impacted by family trauma? I mean, I have no clue. She's all of a sudden is really rebellious. And the guy, upon learning that she's only, 16 or 17, not of age, he denies any relationship with her, and he's like, I'm not gonna marry you. I have a wife. What are you thinking? So it seems like that's kind of the end of Emmeline's acting dream, but I don't know. When the description is given about what this movie is gonna be, it's about the family tragedy. R.S. Hunter died, and then the two sisters who witnessed it never speak again, and the famous actress dies in a car accident, and the other one dies in childbirth, and I'm just like, she was a famous actress. Emmeline continues to go her own merry way, do whatever she wants, stays out all night, hangs out with people that, I don't know if they're good people or bad people, but they're definitely not the right sort of people. She eventually looks at Hannah one day and she's like, I think it would be best if you stay out of my business. And I think she also agreed to stay out of Hannah's business. Okay, so the affair is happening. Deborah makes Hannah cut it off. Hannah then decides, she's absolutely miserable. And Grace thinks it's all over and done with, but now Hannah is acting happy again, and Teddy, who has inherited Riverton, is trying to bring it back to its former glory, and she, who is not a party animal, convinces him to throw this major bash, because they'd always thrown simple affairs, and this time she's like, it's gotta be big. Obviously, it is a ruse, because she and Robbie are gonna run off together. We're wrapping things up here. We're spoiling all the other stuff. She leaves Grace 2 notes, one in shorthand, one for Emmeline. The one for Emmeline says, I'm committing suicide. I'm sorry, can't go on any longer. But the one for Grace, that's a shorthand, and remember, Grace never learned shorthand, and she's cut off all ties with that girl who knows shorthand. She automatically goes to Emmeline. She's like, your sister is gonna kill herself. We have got to go stop her. They get to the lake and they realize that she's not gonna hurt herself. This was her way of making sure that Emmeline didn't worry, that nobody was like, oh my gosh, where'd she go? Emmeline gets upset because now Robbie shows up and she's like, what's going on here? And she's all upset. And I'm like, look, kid, aren't you the one who wanted Hannah to stay out of your business and you want to stay out of Hannah's business? Now you need to be all up in Hannah's business? Yeah, a little hypocritical. What you gonna do? Fireworks are going off, and this is inciting his PTSD. Emmeline, who is none too happy about the situation, pulls out this little pistol. She threatens to shoot herself if they go through with it. All this noise is going off. Emmeline and Hannah are arguing, and he is just like, you have got to shut her up. You have got to shoot her. You have got to get rid of her. Hannah is able to get the gun out of Emmeline's hand, but Robbie continues to move forward, to advance upon them. And spoiler, she ends up shooting Robbie to protect her sister. To which I am kind of disappointed because her sister didn't care about her. That sounds really bad. they're sisters, they love each other, they grew up together. I get it. But Emmeline was a really selfish person, and this was Hannah's one chance at happiness. So now we're finally getting that tragic love story, you know? She would rather save Emmeline, who has treated her like absolute trash and who is threatening to kill herself because she doesn't like that Hannah, because there is this underlying level of jealousy where it's like Hannah always got everything. She got David, she got their dad, she's getting Robbie. Hannah has everything that Emmeline wants. In a sense, I don't think the picture was painted as good as it could have in order to have the impact it needed for me to say, oh my gosh, this is King Solomon. This is the whole, like, what decision do I make? I was just like, you know what? You should have just let Emmeline do whatever Emmeline's gonna do, because Robbie is the one over here suffering and you're gonna shoot him because he's suffering? I mean, I think there was something of a threat. I think he was coming for the gun, but anyways, here is the point where Teddy is bringing people down to the lake because he wants to show them something that he's having built there. And Hannah is like, we can't let people know what happened. We're just going to have to stage this as a suicide. So she tasks Grace with taking the gun and hiding it. So nobody even knew Grace was there. Everybody absolutely believes that Robbie shot himself. From there, this is what drives the ultimate wedge through the sisters. But when they say they never spoke again, this is like 3 months. It's not years from when Robbie dies and Emmeline dies and then Hannah dies. It's a couple of months. Emmeline she's drunk, she's out with other people who are also drunk, she gets into a car accident, she dies. And then Hannah, who had just sunk into a deep, dark depression, who everybody just attributed it to witnessing this event, she ends up getting pregnant, and everybody thinks that it's Teddy's. It turns out to be Robbie's, and at first, I feel like it's almost like he has no clue this kid's not his, but the eyes give it away because Robbie is part Hispanic, I believe. And the eyes make it very obvious to anybody who gets it that this is Robbie's child. Deborah obviously gets it. So I don't know if Teddy would have figured it out on his own, but Deborah is the one who convinces him to send this child off to go live with Jemima and Jemima's daughter. At which point, here's kind of the most unexpected spoiler of all. Jemima raises this child, Florence, as her own. Florence is Ursula's grandmother. Ursula is the filmmaker, so we're full circle here. And I guess, because Marcus does end up showing up. He does listen to these tapes. So I guess off page, they do figure out how Florence is related, but this entire time, Florence has always considered herself as like a second cousin, 8th removed or whatever that lineage would be. So I thought that was really fun, and I do believe that Florence is still alive. So I think that's even cooler that you could go back and be like, Florence, you will have no idea what I just learned. Alfred and Grace do end up together. Obviously, Grace and her husband have divorced. I don't remember if Alfred and his wife divorced or if she had died, but when they're 65, he comes looking for her and she takes a lover, which I don't know. I'm sorry. Like, my parents are older than 65, and there is just something disturbing about thinking about someone in that age and up having a lover. I know it's completely valid and possible, but it just, I don't know. I guess I think of it as a young person thing. Like, you're in your 20s, so maybe you're 45, but you have a 20-year-old lover. Anyway, so I thought that was kind of nice as well. I think that is it. I know I made this book sound really bad, and it wasn't bad. I just don't think, like with Homecoming, it reached its full potential. And there were a lot of moments that I thought Morton could have grabbed hold of better. But if you don't like slow novels, this will not be the one for you. It's not nearly as exciting as her other ones, even though it is just as beautifully written. I feel like I detoured a lot and probably forgot a lot of things. So if you have any questions, I'm here. Bye. Actually, most important thing, Grace dies. Bye.